Welcome, everyone. Tonight's workshop is titled Nurturing Nutritional Recovery at Home, How Family, Language, and Behavior Shapes Adolescent Disorder Recovery. My name is Danny Gillity, and I'm the Executive Director here at the Eating Disorder Foundation, and I'm delighted to welcome everyone here tonight. Tonight's workshop is brought to you in collaboration with the Eating Disorder Foundation and EDCare. Just a little bit about EDF. So we are a nonprofit that was founded in 2003 with a mission to be an effective resource in the prevention and elimination of eating disorders through free and accessible education, support, and advocacy. We are a Denver-based organization that is now serving individuals and families both nationally and internationally. And I just want everyone to know that if you have questions for our presenter, I invite you to use the chat feature. The chat will be left closed and confidential, and therefore I will facilitate a short Q&A at the end. And if you have any questions or want to get in touch with either organization, I will put our contact information in the chat as well. And now I'd like to introduce Olivia Regatta, EDCare's Manager of Professional Outreach, to share a bit about their program and introduce our speaker.
Hey everyone, my name's Olivia. I'm the Manager of Professional Outreach at EDCare. Thank you all so much for taking the time to be here. For those of you who may not be familiar with EDCare, we are a privately held organization with over 24 years of experience in treating eating disorders. We have locations in Colorado, Kansas, and Nebraska, and each of our centers offer individualized evidence-based care supported by a dedicated multidisciplinary team. We offer comprehensive treatment for adults at all of our locations, and we also are proud to provide specialized services for adolescents age 13 and older, along with support for their families in Colorado and Kansas. Tonight, I'm excited to introduce you to Denise Skinner, our adolescent registered dietitian based in Kansas. Denise Skinner earned her Bachelor in Science in Dietetics at Kansas State University in 2018. She then completed her dietetic internship in 2019 and a Master of Science in Dietetics and Nutrition in 2020 from the University of Kansas Medical Center. She has experience working with people of all ages and in all seasons of life. Denise wholeheartedly believes that good health exists at every size and loves to challenge the social construct that weight is the primary indicator of an individual's health, success, and value. Denise, I will pass everything off to you and you can get us started.
Great. Thank you for that introduction. Hi, everyone. I appreciate your willingness to be here with me today and to hopefully learn a little bit about how we approach creating a space for recovery at home when we have so much focus on food. So if you're all ready, I'm going to just jump right in. So what I want to kind of walk us through today is some basic ideas that lay the foundation for why we approach things the way they do. Just a few simple concepts to make sure we're all on the same page about. So we'll check in and make sure we know kind of what recovery, health, healthism, and this idea of modeling. We're going to kind of talk about what those things are. And why we want to do that is because we want to understand when we start to actually talk about the interrelationship of nutrition and recovery. Now, interrelationship meaning just the way two things are connected, two or more, and how they work together. We have a lot of play in recovery. From a nutrition perspective, we look at body image, movement, weight, food, and comparison, and how those all interact when we're working on nutrition rehabilitation. So knowing all that information, we're going to take those concepts and we're going to think about how we create a safe space for recovery at home, right? When we think about nutrition rehabilitation, we're going to look at all those things we talked about, and overarching is our relationship with food and body. So let's kind of jump in. So recovery, I feel like everybody has a different version of it. When I think about recovery, the first thing I think about is that it is an active and ongoing process. We'll hear a lot that it's not linear, meaning we're moving forward, but not always in a straight line. When we go through life with this ongoing process concept, we have life events, going to college, divorce, we might have new stressors, maybe a change in job or a sick pet, that kind of bring us back to actively choosing recovery. We know it takes work, time, and energy. We might see some areas improve, some areas change, others might not. We may feel frustration because it takes time. We can't easily define how long it takes each person. I've often heard folks say it takes as long as it takes. We really do spend a lot of time understanding that in recovery, it's multifaceted. So I have this starred because we are going to break it down a little bit more in my next slide. But from a nutrition perspective, I'm looking at physical, behavioral, psychological, and social indicators that help me understand where we're at with nutrition and recovery. I also like to talk about how recovery is personal, right? We're going to have different approaches for different people, different modalities, ways that we connect and find meaning. I think it's important to notice that, talk about that we learn from our struggles and our setbacks. If we kind of come back to the idea that recovery is not linear, we're always moving forward with the knowledge and the skills that we've learned from our past lived experiences. And the last thing I like to think about is that recovery is more than an absence of behaviors. It is an absence of behaviors in the sense that the behaviors no longer serve them. They've learned new skills and ways to cope. And the choices that they're making align with their values and they're living their authentic life. So this is kind of my little breakout roadmap of what I think recovery means in the essence of what we're going to talk about today. As I mentioned, here's a slide where I break out the different facets of recovery from the physical, behavioral, social, and psychological. When I first made this slide, I was a little worried that it would be busy, overwhelming, but I left it that way in a sense that I want to kind of reinforce the idea of that it takes a team to work on recovery for eating disorders. And that really, there is a multidisciplinary approach. So my hope with this slide is that if we look at each little domain here, above the dotted line, I have indicators that I would look at a simplified level to help me understand for each dimension where we're at with recovery and nutrition. Underneath the dotted line, I have hunger and fullness. So it's kind of inputs and outputs, but it's kind of not. So if I look at the physical side when I'm partnering with the medical team, I'm going to look to see, of course, where weight is at, how our labs are doing. But what I'm really looking for is how are we connecting physically to our hunger? Can I feel it in my body? How is it for me if I describe physical hunger? From a behavioral perspective, I'm of course going to look at behaviors, right? Are they coming up? Are they coming down? What are our eating patterns? And from the hunger and fullness lens, I'm looking, can I admit that I'm hungry, right? Can I act on this hunger? Can I ask for food when I need it? From a social perspective, I'm of course looking, how does different environments influence the way that I feel my hunger and fullness cues? Different situations may make me feel less hungry or feel fullness sooner. So I'm working with the therapy team to also understand how those things are happening. From a psychological perspective, I'm looking to see if rigidity is going down or my food rules lessening. But when I am looking to associate hunger and fullness in this scenario, I'm trying to understand how do these other three dimensions, the physical, the behavior, and the social, how are those hunger cues influencing psychologically? Do I have increased guilt or shame with certain foods? How are these things working for me? So we're kind of doing this moving puzzle piece of how all these things interact together. Okay, so there's that slide. Okay, well, next concept I want us to move on is health. Now, I know we probably all have our own individual definitions of what health might be, so I just chose a very simple one. The state of being free from illness or injury. And I also have up here the 8 dimensions of health. When we think about the whole person health, all of these things that contribute to our health. not just like the literal physical manifestation of health. Now, why I have these up there is because the next concept that I want us to start to explore is the idea of healthism. For some of us, this might be the first time we've heard of healthism. Others, we may be very familiar with this. And so healthism is a set of attitudes and beliefs that health is the most important pursuit in life, that one's health is a personal responsibility, and that is solely within an individual's control. Now, when we look at these 8 dimensions of health, healthism would imply, right, that all these factors that contribute are within my control. And so I want us to kind of keep that in mind, right? So that we have the definition of health, that we're just free from illness and injury. And then we have healthism that says this is the most important pursuit in an individual's life. The next thing that I want to add on to that is when we take those 8 concepts of health that contribute, we've had researchers condense them into different domains and to kind of delineate how much of each category contributes to our overall health. And if we look at the results, we'll see that about 10% of our health comes from the environments we live in, about 20% with kind of access to healthcare, and 40% based on socioeconomic status. So roughly 70% of factors that contribute to our health are things other than physical health and well-being. That is right at 30%. Okay. So when we think back to our term healthism, and I want us to start to think about, are there risks in making choices through the lens of healthism when we know we have at least 70% of our things that contribute to health don't come from physical well-being? So some of the risks that we could encounter if we are making choices through the lens of healthism are, we might make choices in the name of health that actually compromise our health. So this means an example could be, I'm eating healthy and at the sacrifice of my body, right? So it could be I'm going to run more in the name of health. Well, actually, I have an injury. We medicalize everyday life, and this means we treat everyday decisions and activities as a medical concern or a problem or even a disorder. We have a loss of autonomy and maybe some joy. If we're making decisions from this kind of pressurized view of everything I do is about my health, it will limit some of the choices that we make and some of the experiences we might have. When we also take this perspective, we run the risk of disregarding those 70% of those factors that contribute to our health. So we think about our environment, socioeconomic status, those kinds of things. Those more likely not within our control most of the time, and especially not within our children's control. Healthism implies that we're not trying hard enough, right? If you just did more, or that it's our fault that our health is what it is. It just disregards everything and oversimplifies. I do want to point out that if we start to think about healthism or challenge it, this does not mean that we don't care about our health. That's not the goal, but rather that we acknowledge that life is complex and many things are beyond our control, beyond our children's control, and that matters when we think about decisions of health. The last definition I had on our roadmap was modeling, and I just wanted to make sure that we're all on agreement with what I'm talking about here. And this is the idea of how we learn behaviors, attitudes, and skills by observing and imitating others. We do this through communication, observation, and our peers. And we're going to come back to this at the end when we start talking about how do we actually build this space of recovery at home. And you might wonder why a dietitian is talking about this, but I do because our kiddos are watching and listening to what we say and what we do. They are paying attention. This also gives us a chance to check our own biases, our own belief systems about all of the things that we're going to talk about next. Okay. So now I want to start to get into what are some of the things that we would think about when we're going to try to think of a space for recovery at home. So body image, movement, weight, food, and comparison, and just general nutrition concerns are things that are going to come up when we're thinking about nutrition rehabilitation. First, I want to jump into body image. Now, body image is kind of a fine dance that I will do as a dietitian. I'm not treating body image per se, but understanding body image. So body image is simply defined as actions, thoughts, feelings, and perceptions of your own body, not how you view someone else's body. This is specifically how we feel about ourselves. Body image is dynamic. It changes from day to day, for some people, hour to hour, or maybe week to week, depending on what they have going on in their lives. We expect that our kiddos' perspective of how they see their body is not how you see it. It may not match up. Body image is a spectrum. We have feelings of negativity, we have neutrality, and we have positivity. My philosophy is that there isn't a space we're supposed to be at any given time, but just to know where we're at. Some words we might hear associated with negativity could be grief or frustration, kind of discomfort. When we think of neutrality, we might hear terms like function, awareness, appreciation. When we think of positivity, we could hear words like I feel connected, I feel at home in my body, or I'm okay with my body. And so when we think about the way we might hear ourselves or our kiddos talk about their bodies, that can provide us insight into where they are in that moment and their current willingness with recovery. Doesn't mean we understand everything, but it can give us some cues. All right, so some considerations that I want us to think about when we're talking about or thinking about body image, just some basic concepts. We need to understand our bodies will change over time. What we looked like when we were 20, 16, 18, our body won't stay that way. So having this understanding that everybody's bodies change is helpful when creating space at home. When we talk about normal change within a lifespan, we're going to have normal growth and development into our 20s. We grow into our 20s. We do have some more significant cellular degeneration, I guess is the fancy word for it, changes in our 40s and our 60s. We'll see more noticeable changes with our bodies. And of course, different activity levels, pregnancies, health statuses, so many things will change our bodies over time, not just manipulation of weight. Okay. I also like to talk about that we have to acknowledge that recovery is going to bring about change to the body and in the body. So meaning inside and outside changes occurring. So body image is going to be impacted with that double whammy as well. Physical changes can be rapid and very much unwanted. We might hear things like, oh, you look so healthy now, right? Psychologically, changes can feel a lot slower, right? The brain takes longer to heal. Changes can be minimized, like, oh, it's no big deal. Anybody should be able to eat, right? They could be disregarded or missed because things that might be a big accomplishment for an individual, we might not be able to recognize because it seems very commonplace. We might hear things like, why aren't you better yet? You've been in treatment for 6 months. What are you doing, right? So these can conflict. The idea of maybe we look healthy, but we're not acting healthy, and that can really cause some more confusion around body image. And why I care about this when we think about food, because body image drives decision-making and choice. If we know where we're at with body image that day, it might help explain and understand and provide support later with where we're at with decision-making. Okay, now we're going to get into movement. And just to follow suit, I have my definition of movement up here. This is an act of moving the body or part of the body. Movement is an umbrella term that is really just another way to say physical activity. This will include chores, work, exercise, sports, everything fits under movement. When we're working on recovery, we don't need to like separate it. We want to make it inclusive. We're not going to isolate exercise, give that more focus. We're going to bring everything under one umbrella and kind of lump it all into one thing and explore a little bit. So there are a lot of misconceptions that I address with education and considerations that I would like for us to think about. There's a lot of terms I'll hear, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but I will a little bit later, but no pain, no gain, muscle weighs more than fat, all these kinds of different like ideas and beliefs around movement that may have been based in some truth that we've taken with diet culture and kind of distorted. So lots of education that we will address. Behavior-wise, with recovery, we're really wanting to focus and look at compensatory behaviors. So meaning, am I going to move my body to earn the right to eat? So I'm going to run today because I'm going to go out to dinner later. Or I'm going to move my body because of what I ate. So since I went out to dinner, I have to run longer tomorrow. We're going to look at compulsive and over-exercise. This is something we want to address because movement often happens into injury. It can overflow into excessive pacing or leg bouncing, and this would be separate from anxiety. We might be waking at night to perform movement because we need to get more or do it in secret. And it can start to interfere with just regular activities of daily living, right? It can be that disruptive. We're going to challenge behaviors that are focused on wanting to change or control our body shape or weight. So trying to change our appearance versus the way we feel. So some other considerations for movement that I'd like for us to think about for ourselves is that something that felt good to our kiddo might now make them feel terrible, right? An event or a sport that was once something that brought them joy is no longer doing that. So there could be some grief around that. We also need to recognize that movement isn't always a part of everybody's eating disorder. For some people, it's completely separate. And we still might need to pause movement to give more space for other parts of recovery and allow for the nutrition rehabilitation. And that can be tough for a lot of people to kind of wrap their hands around and start doing. Okay, so now we're going to move into weight. So I talk about this topic so much, I feel like I could write 75 papers. So weight is, by this definition, I think I just pulled it from the dictionary, the force of gravity acting on an object's mass or the heaviness of a person or a thing. So that's the definition, right? If we're looking at physics, I think, or just, how the earth works. My take on weight is that our main goal is to reduce the focus on the actual number. We have so much association with proper numbers, appropriate numbers, good numbers, bad numbers. We want to worry less about the actual number, but at the same time, we have to use it as a piece of information in recovery. We can't act like we don't look at weight. We can't act like we don't talk about it. But we need to work on framing it in a way that is honest and helpful. So there are some perspectives that I like to bring to the table when we think about weight. We have something what we might refer to as desired weight. So this might be the weight that our kiddo wants to be at. There could be the weight that the eating disorder says they need to be at. And there could be what the caregivers or the parents want their kiddo to weigh. There's the idea of perceived weight. There's what they think they weigh, right? And then there's a term from Costin that's the biologically appropriate weight. This is my preferred term. This is a term that encompasses just where their body functions optimally. The body tells us where they need to be. There's also the set point theory. If you're not familiar with this, this is the idea that just like we have a predetermined hair color, eye color, height, that our weight is also predetermined. that it wouldn't make sense that there's one perspective of us doesn't have a predetermined genetic disposition. And so it talks about the different like ranges that our bodies will naturally set at. I often kind of reference people to understand if you hear people talking about plateauing and they're just stuck and I can't lose those last 5 pounds, we're often trying to push through a set point. We're working against our body versus we're not doing something like wrong and that we're not working hard enough. We're actually just starting to push our body past the point of where it naturally likes to be. Okay, so with weight, size and shape can also be a focus, individual, like specific body parts. There could be some identity or esteem that is important to someone for there being a specific size, sometimes more than the weight themselves. So sometimes a lot of time I get asked, Denise, why do we have to restore weight? My child looks absolutely fine. So my first response is we have to sit down and talk about how the body is being treated to maintain this weight. What are we doing to our body to keep us at this place where we quote unquote feel like we look healthy? Another thing that we have to challenge is adolescence is a growth state, right? We would expect normal growth, steady weight gain, not losing, right? Through adolescence and puberty, the average weight gain for girls is 40 to 50 pounds, and for boys is 50 to 60 pounds. So a lot of times when parents see larger like jumps in weight changes, they're basing it off of an expectation of where they think numbers should be rather than what normal growth for their child might be. And again, I just stress that we grow into our 20s. We don't stop when we reach our full height. Which growth is more than height. I say that a lot too. I'm sorry if that'll be repetitive today. Growth is more than just how tall we get. I tried to condense into a little slide to talk about culturally and from society's perspective, we expect rapid growth and change through like infancy to 3 years. Like we're all on board how quickly our kiddos are growing and developing and that like feels normal. Then something happens when we slow, right? Like we'll say 7 to 12 years and we kind of just, we steady out, right? We don't have those as much dramatic changes. And then we hit puberty and we have that big jump again. And that is very jarring for a lot of people. It's like we're just kind of expected to stay the same. But when we actually know that we, like I said, we grow into our 20s, our brains, our hormones, our bones, all that is still developing and we're still maturing. Okay. So how do we know what biologically appropriate weight is when we're thinking about how we approach things? So if we're working with a treatment team, it could be set by them. It could be set by a medical provider. Preferably a growth chart is used so we can look at the kiddos' normal growth and what for them what would be considered their appropriate weight. Growth charts are the standards because it supports their individual genetic factors. It's not looking at a chart and just kind of doing a height and weight calculation. So when I'm assessing and looking at growth charts, if I see a decline in weight, like a percentile change, so if a kiddo changed from a 75th to like a 25th percentile, it's safe to assume that's a shorter term kind of malnutrition. If I see a change in height percentile, that's an indicator of a longer term malnutrition. So typically when we look at weight, we want to understand that the body is not the same every single day. No one human typically weighs the exact same thing every day. So we want to have some range and variance for different things. So we might set a range. We might say, here's a target, right? We use round numbers because it's easy to say like 175 instead of 173. But really we're looking for the body to tell us, and we're just kind of targeting with some experience and some growth charts. Hey, this is where we think your body needs to be. While this is happening and I have these growth charts and it's great information, I also need us to understand what behaviors were happening when the weight change took place. And that's not just behaviors from the individual, but like circumstantially, what was going on in their life that would cause some of these behaviors to change. So we can make sure we understand that full picture. And absolutely under no circumstance do I use the BMI. I do calculate it. I have to calculate it, but I don't use that as a guiding factor for weight goals in eating disorder recovery. Okay, now let's hop into food, my favorite topic of all time. Sorry if I get a little excited about this. So the definition of food here is material consisting of protein, carbohydrate, and fat. It's used by the body to sustain growth, repair, and keep our vital processes going, as well as to furnish energy. So you've probably heard people say it's about food, but it's not about food. And that's annoying, but it's so true. Because it's about food, because it's so easy to manipulate, right? It's something that we can take and we can control. Food is a prominent reason for people hating their bodies. We can blame that easily. And there are really serious physical consequences associated with like malnutrition and restrictions. So it really is about food in a lot of ways. And it's not, because it really represents a deeper issue, right? These behaviors are coping mechanisms. And if it was just about food, it would go away when I fed them, right? If it was just about food, everything would magically clear up. And we know that doesn't happen. So it has to be about something else. Okay, when we think about food, those of us working on recovery are thinking about food a whole lot more. And so I tried to make a really cute little mind map word thing of all the words I've heard clients and patients and families describe, and it got really overwhelming. So I had to pull it back, but it's overwhelming. So there's a concept called total conscious time spent thinking about food, weight, hunger, and body image. And what we know about this is the farther we get from the weight our body wants to be, the time we spend thinking about food increases substantially. The closer I get to the weight my body wants to be, the thoughts go down, right? So we can see a direct correlation between that. You might have heard this term as food noise. Sometimes I think that's the new trendy way to say it. And so it's really persistent and intrusive thoughts about food, and it often causes difficulty with choices. It creates so much self-doubt, so much worry, and so that can be a lot of what comes into play when we think about food and nutrition rehabilitation and understanding what we need to consider. So there is a lot around the GLP-1s and those medications and microdosing around food noise. I do think it's important to distinguish that can be separate from just other kinds of intrusive thoughts about food. So the way that we look at that is that after we've renourished, if those thoughts are still there, maybe there's space to look a little bit deeper and see what else might be going on. But first line of defense is to make sure that we're nourished and fed. Okay, with the thoughts going down as we increase our nutrition. Okay, so considerations with food. All right, so when we're working on what do I need to know about food when we're thinking about recovery, we have to really check in, how much do I know about food, right? How much has diet culture come in and influenced my understandings of food? Without judgment, right? Just being kind of really, where am I with this? I have to know and consider my family's needs. Are there certain health considerations or allergens that are important? What am I able to do? What can I do? What do I have the energy to do? And what do I want to do when it comes to food? All those factors play a role when we look later at creating a space for recovery. Are there different kinds of religious or cultural influences that also come into play in the recovery experience? And then we have to think about, what are my commitments, right? What are my own food rules? What are my own motivations around food? The other thing that comes into play with food is meal plan. It's a term that's thrown around a lot. It's met by some people with, they're not so excited. Other people love the structure. So Typical meal plans, we see eating about 6 times a day on average. It's going to vary based off individual needs. We're doing this to kind of regulate and support fullness. We're looking to keep metabolic processes balanced. I'm looking to habituate eating, to normalize it, and we're looking to check in with our hunger and fullness cues. There are various kinds of meal plans, exchange systems, plate methods, fuel groups. There's all kinds of things out there. You may have heard of lots of different options. My take is whichever one works best for your family. We have supplementary kind of additions to meal plans. We could have vitamins, we could have extra food, we could have supplements. We look at fluids with our meals. We look for, are we moving our bodies? Do we have physical symptoms where we need to adjust our fluids? And then we also have the dreaded drinks with calories. That is a very hot topic in recovery and nutrition, is that if this is empty calories or if this is unnecessary. We spend a lot of time looking at that. Now, you might be wondering, why does Denise care about all that, right? And why would I care about this? So when we look at, this might look kind of familiar. It's a spinoff of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And this is a basic food needs pyramid, right? And at the bottom of it is simply enough food, right? Am I getting enough food? And meal plan comes in with that to provide adequacy and frequency of eating. Above that, we have acceptable foods. When in the lens of recovery, we might think safe foods, familiar foods, preferred foods, right? We're looking to build on enough and getting some acceptable foods in. When access to foods, in some circumstances, could mean food security. But when we think about recovery, that could also mean permission. Am I giving myself permission to have these foods? So access can mean physical and it can also mean emotional, right? On top of that, we have preferred foods, which for me is flexibility. Can I eat when the foods I prefer are not available? Can I demonstrate that I can take care of myself? Then we have where a lot of families think that we should be within a couple weeks of like starting recovery, is food tastes good, food's fun, food's a center of social events. Why are you avoiding food, right? We have to take that step back and acknowledge those 4 foundations that we really have to build to be able to have the emotional capacity to let food feel good, to have an interest in food. And so we might explore the idea of food bringing pleasure and what comes up for us and how do we manage that. And at the very teeny tiny top of that pyramid is basically the rest of the food pyramid condensed and just smashed on top, like our macros, the 4 food groups, vitamins and minerals, whatever, however we view that. And it's at the top intentionally because the concept is if we have all these foundational things in place, we will eat nutritious food because we want to, not because we have to, but because we can and we enjoy it. So when we think about basic needs and how recovery comes into interplay with that, this is what this pyramid is representing for us. Okay, comparison. Y'all, comparison keeps me busy. Like, I don't know. So when I'm thinking about recovery and making it safe for other people to feel like they can recover, social comparison, self-comparison, and then all the comparisons that we have with body, weight, size, movement, and food. So social comparison is there's upward, downward, and lateral. So upward, I am perceiving that someone might have a better body than me, and I want to strive to look like Julia. I don't know. Downward perception, like comparison, could be, oh, well, I have a better body than Jessica, right? I'm better off than her. Lateral comparison means, oh, Angela and I are the same. We have the same kind of body, right? We have self-comparison. So I know that social media is awesome in a lot of ways, but it also creates the space for so much self-comparison to go back, look at Snap stories, like do all those things. So we're comparing past, current, and future. And we might compare body weight, size, food, and movement. We can do this with a gold clothing item. We might keep it home for ourselves, or we might compare to others. Okay, so now that I've rambled about what I want us to consider, why do we look at all these things when we're talking about food, I want to start to get in, how do we really start to do this? So I'm going to have a lot of lists. And so I will be more than willing to provide these like lists to you guys if you're interested, but I don't expect that you will be able to read everything all at once. So just fair warning. So when we think about the concept of healthism that I brought up, I want us to think about de-emphasizing weight-centric approaches to life. So meaning all my decision-making isn't focused around choices that impact weight, right? And I hope that kind of makes sense, that we take that step back of making weight less important. And so in doing this, it's really a lot of self-work, a lot of reflection on ourselves and how we come up and show up when we're interacting with our kiddos and in our homes. So a lot of times I will have families define what health means to them. What does it mean to their family? Do they understand that? What kind of choices do I make about all these things? Do I do this not knowingly? So reflecting on why we do those things, what comes up for us, is it genuine concern for health? What is the benefit for me thinking this way? When I think about others, why am I thinking about their health? Did they ask me to? Right? Why do I feel entitled to know their weight? Things like that. Healthism is exhausting and having to challenge it relentlessly. And so ways that we can challenge this is we don't have to get our weight unless it's medically necessary in a doctor's office. We can look at things that we might hear in conversations with friends, family, at work. We don't have to like promote or like work wellness programs or war on childhood obesity in schools. We can find appropriate places for that and ways to manage that instead of bringing them about in a shameful way. We do have to act with intention and persistence when we are challenging and evaluating healthism. And kind of like I mentioned above, it's every day, it's calling out judgment, it's not making assumptions, and it's also putting a lot of trust in it. If I do these things as an individual, it is going to make a difference. And over time, it does matter. When we think about modeling, that word that I brought up before, I want to break out under communication, conversation, and language. And so I look at this from a few different perspectives too. So the first thing I think about is when we're talking to our kiddos, right? When we're actually having conversations to them, what are they hearing and seeing from us? So there might be topics that we've learned to avoid or things we might be uncertain of. Can I talk about these things? What happens at meals and snacks? I feel like I'm eating with my kiddos so much, I don't know what to talk about, right? So a few things that I like to think about is with the situational awareness, is this a higher stress situation, right? Like, is it at the meal? Am I shopping? Are we getting ready to go somewhere for a holiday, right? That's going to help guide us on which topics might be appropriate, right? Things that I encourage us to just avoid in general in most conversations: body, weight, how much we're eating, how clothes fit, how they used to perform during events or their past times, right? So keeping things neutral. And I know sometimes it's hard to not talk about those things when you're trying to not talk about those things, but for a lot of families, playing games, having conversation starters, those simple things that we've probably heard before really do help keep us kind of focused there and keeping us aware of what situation we're in and what's important. There are ways we can talk about recovery without talking about the eating disorder, right? And so those could be ways of saying, hey, I've noticed something that you did, how did that go, right? Like, I noticed that you made your own snack. I didn't even have to prompt you. Versus, I don't know, like, how many times have you restricted today? I also like to talk about how it's important to talk to them about things other than recovery and eating disorder. They're already spending so much time thinking about it. It's nice to have conversations that don't focus around that. So when we talk around our kids, right? This is also really important because they are listening. So we want to really make sure that our actions are aligning with our words, right? So what we say to our kiddos, we're following when they're not around. So an example could be like you told them that it's okay that they had cheese on their hamburger, but then they noticed, another time you didn't have it. That's just an example of something that I could bring about. We want to make sure messages are consistent. So if we tell one child it's okay to have seconds, we want to make sure that we've said that same message to every kiddo. And we're not saying, I'm sorry, you don't actually need that, Bethany. And then how we talk about ourselves and others, they're listening. So if we give the message that, your body is beautiful, you don't need to speak negatively about yourself, and then we turn around and do that, or speak poorly about someone we know or a family member, they're going to log that in their brain and remember that you said that. And I'm not saying that to fearmonger, I'm just pointing out. And when we talk about our kids, right, a lot of times we don't think about this one. And I think it's important to kind of stop and check in. And if we're talking about where they are in recovery, are we focusing on what they are looking like, what their health is right now, maybe both, and just kind of understanding what are we saying when we're talking about our kiddos. Okay, another dimension of modeling that we're going to talk about real quick here is behaviors. And I like to break out behaviors versus actions because it helps me kind of build foundational steps. So action is our doing, the observable, measurable, the thing that we're doing persistently. This is eating meals and snacks with our kids. This is intentionally reframing. If I say something that maybe wasn't the most positive, I can pause and say, oh, right? I can say it a different way. It's us challenging diet culture. And this is important because actions shape behaviors. And behaviors are more complicated, right? It's the way that we react and interact in different situations. And it's our overall patterns and how we behave. This is the consistency that sometimes we're looking for, right? And this shows up as reduced negative self-talk. We're not talking about food and body, and it's how we carry ourselves. And behaviors follow action. So the more we practice and do these things, like we think of toothbrushing, right? Like we've created a behavior now. Okay, the last part of modeling is peers. This is kind of gets on the therapy side real quick, but this is an important part of development. And so my role and my perspective on how modeling and friends and social groups comes into play with food is that it's okay that we set boundaries around meal times and behaviors, right? We know that different stages of recovery require different levels of oversight and different levels of autonomy, right? So we need to be mindful of diet culture and also open to allyship. Sometimes when we think about our kiddos leaving and having a meal or snack somewhere else or eating around others, we're worried that they might get upset or have an opportunity to restrict. But we also need to remember that we can find support in surprising places. So diet culture is everywhere. That's a fact, but so is support and others that are also maybe going through the same thing. So we can find both of these things wherever we go, and making sure that we're modeling these behaviors at home so that our kiddos can recognize it when they're out and about is important. So when I mentioned earlier, talking about setting boundaries, sometimes it's going to make sense to avoid situations that we know are just going to be too much at this time. And others, it might make sense to have an exposure and see how our kiddo does. Because when we're with peer groups, that gives them a chance to practice, to kind of have some of that independence. There's different activities, ways that we can practice at home, have people over for movie nights, serve snacks, normalize that. And really understanding that it is okay for them to not be perfect. A lot of people working on recovery struggle with perfectionism enough, right? It can be helpful for them to struggle a little bit to see that they're okay and for parents to see that they're okay. And if we see something that we liked, an interaction with a peer, acknowledge it appropriately, say something. That's kind of how I look at the interaction of social modeling and food and how that kind of interrelates. Okay, when we think about how we're going to do with body image, we really need to embrace body diversity and walk that walk and talk that talk and not just say it like it's a nice catchphrase. So this is going to make a lot of us challenging where I am and my understanding of how weight bias and weight stigma comes into play for myself, how I feel about things, and how I show up. And understanding how those things influence the way I present. There's some great books out there if y'all like to read, if you're readers, but sometimes it is helpful to read books for ourselves before we start to offer support for others. And so there's all kinds of books out there that can help us with that. And I find one of the most effective things is to really work on speaking neutrally or even positively, if that feels good to you, about ourselves and others. Really putting forth that energy and evaluating how often I do that. Okay, with movement, we're going to do the same things. We're going to look through what is my relationship with movement. Why do I move my body? Is all my family's physical time centered around quality time together? Do I isolate one kiddo to move their body and not others? We're going to just start addressing and looking at some of those things. What myths do I believe? And really challenge the idea that movement is, we do it for weight loss, right? We want to challenge that and find the different ways that movement comes into play and how it benefits for us. There are some different books out there that are also pretty positive. I like Train Happy. It's fun. It's simple, easy read. But with movement, taking an intentional approach and creating a safe space for any kind of movement, that's what we're really looking for when we're trying to create that at home. I have on this slide here a bunch of those misconceptions. So I want to highlight no pain, no gain. A reframe we would look for in recovery is that we want to feel sensation in our body. We don't want to feel pain, right? When we think about muscle weighs more than fat, it doesn't. It's different. It doesn't weigh more or less, but we want to work on that weight doesn't define me. That's not what's important, right? And so we go through and challenge some of these things. Same idea with weight. We want to reflect. I have a bunch of prompts that I would work through with the family and reflecting on how those impact us and how we show up in the world. And then when we can identify misconceptions that we have about weight that we think maybe could be helpful for us to address, we can start to do that. One of the hardest questions I get asked is, what if I think my kid does not need to lose weight? I mean, gain weight, or I think they should lose weight. How do I handle that? And so I would ask that we really stop and think about a few things. We would ask, is this a priority right now? Will it be helpful? And why do I think this is true? And if we can stop and kind of reflect on those three questions, we can usually find some good answers, because we know that weight loss is contraindicated in adolescents, but is there room for it later? I would like to remind everybody that body image is going to be a challenge no matter what your body size is. It's going to be hard. And if we can allow our kiddos the chance to recover in adolescence, and then maybe later in life, in adulthood, if they want to explore weight loss, that can be their choice. But during adolescence, our goal is to support recovery. Okay. Food, same thing, guys. I have a bunch of prompts and things that we would work on for self-reflection and like, why am I hungry? Why am I choosing these foods? And going through and identifying what some of maybe what I grew up with. What were some rules that I heard? What were some things my mom or my grandma or my uncle would say, right? And working towards this concept of food neutrality. And food neutrality is this food model that we're making space to reduce judgment and shame and give some room to try things without consequence, right? Understanding that we're not only eating chips or only eating spinach every day, right? This is really a space to come through and say, we can make room for this. Let's give this a try. Okay, comparison, same idea, guys. We're gonna have the lists of prompts and reflections, and that'll take us to our last slide. We're putting it all together. So when we look through and we think about healthism, we think about the concepts of modeling, how does body image, movement, weight, food, and comparison all interrelate to kind of come into play when we are looking to work on recovery? It's complicated, right? It's all intertwined. But if we have some of these core concepts of understanding what health means for our family, how do I represent myself in my home and support? How do I feel about these topics? We can start to create that space where recovery can happen. And it can happen in a way that feels safe for everybody. So I think, y'all, I'm done rambling. I'm ready to hand it back. Are you guys ready?
My gosh, thank you so much. That was so informative, and I can't wait to share this PowerPoint and this presentation with like all of our families. So thank you. Thank you. We didn't have chat or questions come in through the chat. So I just want to open this space up. If anyone has any questions that they'd like to just unmute themselves and ask, we have a few minutes. So I definitely want to leave some space for that. Olivia, I didn't know if there was anything you wanted to add. But again, Denise, like, could not be more grateful for your time.
Yeah.
And putting this together. I feel like I want to go rewatch it again. There were like so many bits and pieces in there. So thank you so much. And again, if anyone has a question, now's the time to unmute yourself. And hey, I'm not hearing from anyone. So I guess on that note, and also just say I put EDCare, Olivia's contact information in the chat. If you have questions for them, please reach out to her directly. I put EDF's information in there as well. So if you have any questions for us, please contact us. And I guess with that, we'll say goodnight and thank you again for taking the time to work with us this evening. And thank you, Olivia, for helping putting it together.
Thank you. And yeah, if anybody wants to reach out, I can get you connected with Denise as well. So if you have any questions or want to learn more about EDCare, happy to help.
Could I ask one quick question?
Of course.
Is there any way to review what this whole presentation was? Can we see it again? If you want
Yes,
to
it
see
was
it again?
recorded. And you'll get the recording, a notification just to your email when it gets put on our YouTube channel. So it will be there.
All right, then. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, will we get the slideshow as well, like the slide, like a PDF of this, or no?
I guess that's up to Denise and Olivia, but
Yeah, and I can check in with Olivia. I have just pulled out the slides that have a lot of the prompts and the self-reflection. I pulled that just into a separate document so that I could share that if people would be interested in having some of that for sure.
I definitely would. Thank you so much.
Okay. Yes.
good.
Quite
So
welcome.
maybe Denise, I can get that from Olivia.
Yeah. Yeah, I will
Okay.
send that over for sure.
Wonderful.
Okay, thanks.
And we can share all the slides. That's no problem as well.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you both. Thanks, everyone. Have a lovely evening.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thank you.